Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. I was standing in my kitchen in Charlotte, North Carolina, wearing my good church dress and my fresh press-on nails, feeling myself for the first time in 20 years. My new husband, Keon, was upstairs getting ready for our 6-month anniversary dinner, and I was humming along to Mary J. Blige when that doorbell rang. I didn't think nothing of it at first, probably a delivery or one of them kids selling candy for their school. But when I opened that door and saw her standing there with her honey-brown skin, her father's eyes, and her hand wrapped around the arm of the most beautiful man I'd ever laid eyes on, my whole world tilted sideways. She looked at me with this mixture of pain and rage that made my stomach drop, and before I could even ask who she was, she said the words that would haunt me forever. "I'm Nalani, Jerome's daughter, the one he abandoned when I was 3. And this man right here?" She pulled him closer, and he looked at me with eyes that held secrets I wasn't ready to know. "This is my fiancé, Keon." My knees almost gave out right there on my welcome mat. The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest because my Keon, my young handsome husband who made me feel alive again after Jerome died, was upstairs in our bedroom putting on cologne. Except now this girl, this stranger with my dead husband's face, was telling me that the man she was holding on to shared the same name. I gripped the doorframe so hard my press-ons nearly popped off, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She was maybe 25, dressed in clothes that cost more than my car payment, with box braids that fell to her waist and jewelry that sparkled even in the porch light. The man beside her looked about 30, built like he spent every day in somebody's gym, with skin the color of midnight and a jawline that could cut glass. He wasn't looking at me with recognition or guilt or anything that would make sense. He was looking at me like I was a stranger, and that's when my heart started beating so fast I thought I might pass out right there. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper, but my voice came out strangled and weak. Nalani's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like the expression of someone who'd been waiting years to deliver a punch they'd been rehearsing. "Of course you don't understand, Claudette. My father made sure you never knew about me. Made sure I grew up thinking I wasn't good enough for his new perfect life with you and your son. But I know everything now. I know how he left my mama with nothing. I know how he built his whole empire while we struggled in them raggedy apartments in Brooklyn. And I know about the will." That last word hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what she meant, but all I could focus on was the man beside her and the sound of footsteps coming down my stairs. My Keon was about to walk into whatever nightmare this was, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for any of this. "Baby, you ready? I made reservations at—" Keon's voice cut off mid-sentence when he reached the bottom of the stairs and saw the people standing at our door. I watched his face like I was watching a movie, saw every emotion flicker across it in slow motion. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like fear mixed with guilt. He froze with one hand still on the banister, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. Nalani's grip on her man's arm loosened, and she turned to look at Keon with an expression I couldn't read. The man beside her, this other Keon, looked between my husband and me with dawning understanding, and I saw his jaw clench. The silence stretched so long I could hear my neighbor's wind chimes 3 houses down, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like drums. Then my Keon said something that made everything worse. "Nalani, I can explain." The world stopped spinning right there in my doorway. Nalani's face transformed from righteous anger to something darker, something that looked like betrayal and vindication all mixed together. She let go of her man's arm and took a step toward my husband, her voice dropping to something cold and deadly. "You said you didn't know her. You said when you found me last year, it was just about getting to know Jerome's daughter. You said you had nothing to do with her or her family." My husband, my Keon, the man I'd married 6 months ago after Jerome died and left me alone, looked at me with eyes full of tears I didn't understand. "Baby, I was going to tell you. I just needed the right time. I needed to figure out how to but I couldn't hear the rest because my ears were ringing and my chest was so tight I couldn't breathe. The other man, Nalani's fiancé, stepped forward and spoke for the first time, his voice deep and steady. Someone better start talking right now, because I proposed to this woman 3 weeks ago, and if somebody's playing games with her heart, we're going to have a problem. Let me take you back to where this all started, back when I was just Claudette Morrison from West Charlotte, 38 years old, with a teenage son, and dreams that felt too big for my broke reality. I was working double shifts at Presbyterian Hospital as a nursing assistant, my feet swollen every night, my back aching from lifting patients twice my size. My son Darius was 16, angry at the world, angry at me for working so much, angry at his daddy for leaving us when he was just a baby. I was tired, y'all. Not just body tired, but soul tired, the kind of exhaustion that makes you forget what hope feels like. Then, Jerome walked into my life like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, all confidence and smooth words and promises that sounded too good to be real. He was 45, owned 3 barbershops across Charlotte, drove a Mercedes that still had that new car smell, and when he smiled at me in the hospital cafeteria that June morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. Jerome didn't come on too strong at first, and that's what made me trust him. He'd show up during my breaks with coffee, ask about my day, listen to me complain about difficult patients and impossible schedules. He told me about his businesses, how he'd built everything from nothing, how he understood struggle because he'd lived it. He never mentioned a daughter, never mentioned Brooklyn or a woman he'd left behind or a child growing up without him. He painted himself as a self-made man who'd been waiting his whole life to find someone real, someone who understood hard work and sacrifice. And Lord help me, I believed every word. By August, he was helping me with bills. By September, Darius was calling him Uncle Jerome and actually smiling again. By November, I'd moved into his house in Ballantyne, a neighborhood I'd only ever driven through while working private nursing gigs for rich white families. I thought I'd finally made it, thought God had finally decided to bless me after years of struggle. The wedding was small, just courthouse simple, but Jerome promised me a real ceremony later when business settled down. He bought me a ring that made my coworkers gasp, took me to fancy restaurants where I had to Google what half the food was, treated Darius like the son he said he never had. For 3 years, I lived in a dream I didn't know was built on somebody else's nightmare. Jerome's barbershops did well. We took vacations to Miami and Jamaica. I cut back my hours at the hospital, started taking classes to become a full nurse. Darius got into college on a partial scholarship, and Jerome paid the rest without blinking. I thought I knew this man inside and out, thought I understood every scar and every story. But people can hide whole lives from you, can smile in your face every morning while carrying secrets that would destroy you if you knew. Jerome was a master at that, at making you feel like you were his whole world while he kept entire universes locked away in the dark. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way he never wanted me to meet his family, said they were toxic, and he'd cut them off years ago. The way he'd get phone calls he'd take in another room, his voice low and tense. The way sometimes he'd stare off into nothing with this look on his face like he was carrying weight he couldn't share. I asked him about it once, wrapped my arms around him from behind while he stood on our balcony looking out at nothing. "Baby, you okay? You seem far away." He'd kissed my hands and told me he was just thinking about business, about expansion, plans about making sure we were set up for the future. He said he wanted to leave me and Darius something real, something that would last. I thought that was love talking, thought I was hearing a man who'd finally found his purpose. I didn't know I was hearing guilt from a man who'd abandoned his first child and was trying to make up for it by building a perfect second family. Then, 3 years into our marriage, Jerome had the heart attack that took him from me in less than 2 minutes. He collapsed in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, coffee cup still in his hand, toast burning in the toaster. I performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, pumped his chest and breathed into his mouth and begged God not to take him from me. But he was gone before we even got to the hospital, gone before I could ask him the 1,000 questions that would haunt me later. The funeral was packed with people I'd never met, barbershop customers and business associates and folks from neighborhoods he'd never taken me to. Darius held me up while I cried into his shoulder, my 21-year-old son being stronger than I could manage. The lawyer read the will 2 weeks later in his downtown office with its leather chairs and mahogany desk. That's when I learned Jerome had been good to us. The house was paid off, the barbershops were in a trust for Darius to manage, and there was a life insurance policy that would keep me comfortable forever. I thought that was the end of the story. Thought grief was the only thing I'd have to carry. I didn't know the real story was just beginning. Didn't know that 6 months later, I'd meet Keon and fall into something that felt like a second chance at happiness. And I definitely didn't know that Jerome's past was about to show up at my door and blow my whole life apart. Keon walked into my life exactly 8 months after I buried Jerome. And baby, he made me feel things I thought had died with my husband. I met him at Darius's college graduation party at our house, this fine young man with smooth, dark skin and a smile that could light up a room. He was Darius's friend from his part-time job at the gym, 29 years old, but carrying himself with a maturity that made me forget about the age gap. He helped me set up tables in the backyard, laughed at my jokes, listened when I talked about how proud I was of my son. When the party wound down and everyone else was drunk and loud, Keon stayed behind to help me clean up, washing dishes while I put away food, our conversation flowing easy like we'd known each other for years. He told me about his dreams of opening his own personal training business, about growing up with a single mother who worked herself to death, about understanding loss because he'd buried her just 2 years before. Something in his eyes when he talked about his mama made me see him different, made me realize he understood grief the way only people who've lived through it can. I didn't let myself think about him like that at first. He was Darius's age, practically a baby compared to my 41 years. But he started showing up more often, stopping by to check on me when Darius was busy with his new job managing Jerome's barbershops. Keon would bring me lunch on days I worked at the hospital, sit with me on my breaks, ask me questions about my life that made me feel interesting instead of just tired. He fixed my garbage disposal when it broke, helped me plant flowers in the front yard, taught me how to use the weights in the home gym Jerome had built but I'd never touched. 3 months after we met, Keon kissed me in my kitchen after we'd spent the afternoon cooking together. And y'all, I felt like a teenager again. My heart raced. My hands shook. I pulled back and told him this was crazy, that I was too old for him, that people would talk. He looked at me with those intense brown eyes and said age was just a number, that he'd never felt this way about anyone, that I made him want to be better. I believed him because I needed to believe him, because after Jerome died, I'd felt invisible, and Keon made me feel seen again. We kept it quiet at first, sneaking around like kids, meeting at hotels when I got off work, texting each other late at night when we couldn't sleep, but the secret started eating at me, especially when Darius would mention Keon and I'd have to pretend we were just friendly. 6 months after that first kiss, I sat my son down in our living room and told him the truth. I expected anger, expected him to cuss me out and call me desperate. Instead, Darius was quiet for a long minute, then asked me if Keon made me happy. I told him yes, told him Keon made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt since before Jerome died. My son looked at me with eyes older than his years and said, if I was happy, he was happy, but I needed to be careful, because grief makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. I heard his words, but I didn't really listen. Didn't want to believe that what I felt for Keon was just loneliness dressed up as love. 2 months later, Keon proposed to me on the beach in Myrtle Beach during a weekend trip, getting down on one knee in the sand while the sunset painted the sky orange and pink. The ring wasn't as expensive as the one Jerome gave me, but it felt more real somehow. Felt like it came from a place of genuine emotion instead of obligation. I said yes with tears streaming down my face. Said yes because I was tired of being alone, tired of sleeping in a bed that felt too big, tired of cooking dinner for one. We got married a month later at a small ceremony in my backyard with just Darius, a few close friends, and Keon's boys from the gym. I wore a cream-colored dress that made me feel beautiful, and when Keon looked at me during our vows, I thought I saw forever in his eyes. We honeymooned in Jamaica, the same place Jerome had taken me years before, but I didn't let myself think about that. I was building a new life with a new man, And I was determined to be happy, determined to prove to everyone, including myself, that this wasn't just a grief-driven mistake. But marriage changed things between us in ways I didn't expect. Keon moved into Jerome's house, into the space my first husband had built, and sometimes I'd catch him staring at the family photos on the walls with an expression I couldn't read. He started asking questions about Jerome's business, about the barbershops, about how much money Jerome had left us. At first, I thought he was just curious, just trying to understand my past. But the questions got more specific, more probing. He wanted to know about Jerome's family, about why I never met any of them, about whether there were any relatives who might show up claiming inheritance. I told him what I knew, which wasn't much. Jerome had always been private about his past, always said his family was dead to him. Keon would nod and smile and drop the subject. But I started noticing him on his laptop late at night, searching for something, his face illuminated by the blue screen glow. When I asked what he was doing, he'd close the laptop quick and say, "Just work stuff, business plans for his training company." I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that my new husband wasn't keeping secrets, but something in my gut kept whispering that I was missing something important, something that would matter later. I ignored that whisper because I was in love, because I was happy, because I didn't want to believe that I'd been fooled twice by men who wore good faces while hiding dark truths underneath. That night, after Nalani showed up at my door, after everyone's secrets started spilling out onto my front porch, we all ended up in my living room in the most awkward standoff I'd ever experienced in my life. Nalani sat on my couch like she owned it, her fiancé, whose name I learned was Keon Baptiste, standing behind her with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. My husband, my Keon, whose last name was Johnson, sat in Jerome's old recliner looking like he wanted to disappear into the leather. And I stood by the fireplace, my anniversary dinner forgotten, my press-on nails digging into my palms as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Nalani looked around the room with eyes that took in every detail, every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture Jerome had bought. Then she started talking, and her story ripped my heart clean out of my chest. She told me about her mother, Shanice, about how Jerome met her in Brooklyn when he was 23 and she was 19, about how he promised her forever and then disappeared when Nalani was 3 years old. According to Nalani, Jerome had been building his first barbershop in Brooklyn when he met her mother, a beauty school student with dreams bigger than her circumstances. They fell in love fast, moved in together, had Nalani before they turned 25. But Jerome's business wasn't doing well in Brooklyn. Too much competition, too many established shops. He started traveling to Charlotte for business opportunities, said he was networking, building connections. Then one day, he just never came back. Left Shanice with a 3-year-old, $600, and a note saying he needed to start fresh somewhere new. Nalani's voice cracked when she talked about growing up without him, about watching her mother work 3 jobs to keep them fed, about wondering why her daddy didn't love her enough to stay. She said Shanice never badmouthed Jerome, always told Nalani that her father was a good man who just got lost, but Nalani knew better. She knew he'd chosen a new life over his old one, chosen success over his daughter. "I found out about you 3 years ago," Nalani said, looking directly at me with eyes full of pain and accusation. "I was 22, and Mama finally told me the truth about where he went. She'd been keeping tabs on him all those years through mutual friends, watching him build his empire in Charlotte, watching him marry you and play stepfather to your son while I grew up with nothing. I wanted to confront him, wanted to make him see what he'd done to us. But before I could work up the courage, he died. She laughed, but it was a bitter sound that held no joy. He died and left everything to you and your son, the family he chose, while me and Mama got nothing. Not an apology, not a dollar, not even acknowledgement that I existed. Like I was a mistake he could just erase by moving to a new city. I wanted to defend Jerome, wanted to say he must have had his reasons, but I couldn't because she was right. He'd erased her, had built a whole life without ever mentioning he had a daughter, and I'd been too in love to see the gaps in his stories. Then Nalani told me about meeting my Keon, and that's when my world really started crumbling. She said Keon Johnson had shown up at her apartment in Brooklyn about a year ago, said he'd been doing research on Jerome's family, said he wanted to help her get what was rightfully hers. He told her about the will, about how Jerome had left everything to me and Darius, about how that wasn't fair when Jerome had abandoned his first child. He said he could help her fight it if she wanted, but she had to trust him, had to let him get close to the family. Nalani didn't understand what he meant at first, didn't understand how some stranger could help her. Then Keon explained his plan. And baby, when she said those words out loud in my living room, I felt my knees give out. I had to grab the mantle to stay standing, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing, couldn't believe my marriage was based on a lie so deep it touched everything I thought was real. He said he'd marry you, Nalani whispered, and tears were running down her face now. Said he'd get close to you, make you fall in love with him, and once he was your husband, he'd have legal standing to challenge the will on my behalf. Said Jerome's estate should be split 3 ways, you, your son, and me. Said he'd take a percentage for helping us, but I'd finally get what my father owed me. She looked at my husband with betrayal written all over her face. You said you were doing this for me. You said you wanted to help Jerome's abandoned daughter get justice. You made me believe you were some kind of hero, that you understood my pain because you'd been abandoned too. And I believed you. She turned to her fiancé, her real Keon, and he was looking at my husband like he wanted to put him through a wall. We met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn 6 months ago. You were still married to her. You were living in Charlotte playing husband while courting me in New York. And I had no idea because you said your business kept you traveling, said you were setting up gyms in different cities. Her voice broke completely. You proposed to me while married to her. You looked me in my eyes and said you loved me while you were sleeping in her bed. Who does that? What kind of monster are you? My husband, or the man I thought was my husband, finally found his voice after Nalani's words hung in the air like a death sentence. He stood up from Jerome's recliner, his hands shaking, his face covered in guilt and fear that made him look like a stranger. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he said, but his voice was weak, pathetic. I was supposed to help Nalani, help her get some money from Jerome's estate, and then we'd all move on with our lives. But then Claudette, baby, I fell in love with you. For real. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, wasn't supposed to care, but you were so kind and so genuine, and you made me feel things I'd never felt before. He took a step toward me, and I backed away like he was poison, like his touch would burn my skin clean off. Everything I said in our vows was real. Everything we built was real. I just made a mistake in how it started, that's all. I was trying to help someone who'd been wronged, and I fell in love in the process. That's not a crime. Nalani shot up from the couch so fast her fiancé had to grab her arm to stop her from lunging at my husband. A mistake? You call destroying 2 women's lives a mistake? You married her under false pretenses. You proposed to me while married to her. You played us both like we were pawns in whatever sick game you were running. She was crying now, really crying, her whole body shaking with rage and hurt. I trusted you. I thought you understood my pain. I thought you were helping me because you were a good person who wanted to see justice done. But you were just running a con, weren't you? You saw an opportunity when you met Darius at that gym, saw a widow with money, saw Jerome's abandoned daughter who could be your ticket to a payday. You manipulated both of us, used our pain against us, and for what? Money? A percentage of an estate that wasn't even yours to touch? The truth of what Nalani was saying hit me like physical blows. Every sweet word Keon had said, every gentle touch, every promise of forever had been calculated. He'd researched Jerome, found out about Nalani, found Darius at the gym, and befriended him just to get close to me. He'd played the role of the grieving son who lost his mother, knowing I'd relate to that pain, knowing I'd see him as someone who understood loss. He'd been patient, moving slow, building trust, making me fall in love with him so completely that I'd marry him and give him legal access to everything Jerome had left behind. And the worst part, the part that made me want to throw up right there on my expensive carpet, was that I'd made it easy for him. I'd been so lonely, so desperate to feel young and desired again, that I'd ignored every red flag. I'd ignored Darius's warning about grief, making people do things they wouldn't normally do. I'd ignored my own gut telling me something wasn't right when Keon asked too many questions about Jerome's past and his estate. "Get out," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. Get out of my house right now before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud." Keon's face crumpled and he started toward me again, his hands reaching out like he could somehow fix this with touch. "Claudette, please, just listen to me. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but what we have is real. I love you. I don't care about the money anymore. I just care about us. We can work through this, baby. We can get counseling. We can rebuild trust. We can—" But I cut him off because I couldn't listen to any more lies, couldn't stand to hear him call me baby one more time with that voice that had whispered sweet nothings in my ear while he was planning my destruction. "You don't get to talk to me about what's real. You don't get to stand in my house, in the house my first husband built, and tell me you love me after what you've done. You married me under false pretenses, you committed fraud, and apparently you proposed to another woman while we were married, which I'm pretty sure makes you a bigamist or something close to it." Nalani's fiancé, the real Keon, the one who'd been played just as badly as I had, stepped forward and spoke with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "I'm going to walk you out now," he said to my husband, and it wasn't a request. "And if you ever come near either of these women again, if you ever try to contact them, if you ever even think about them, I'm going to make sure every gym in this city knows exactly what kind of person you are. I'm going to make sure everyone you do business with knows you're a fraud and a con artist. And then I'm going to let Nalani's family in Brooklyn know what you did to her, and trust me when I say you don't want them coming after you." He grabbed my husband by the arm and started walking him toward the door, and Keon Johnson didn't resist. He looked back at me one last time with tears in his eyes, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something else, but I turned away. I couldn't look at him anymore, couldn't stand to see his face. I heard the front door open and close, heard a car start and drive away, and then there was silence except for the sound of Nalani crying on my couch. After the door closed behind Keon Johnson and Nalani's fiancé came back inside, the three of us stood in my living room like survivors of the same disaster, trying to figure out what came next. Nalani was still crying, her mascara running down her face in black rivers, her hands shaking as she tried to wipe her eyes. I wanted to hate her, wanted to blame her for bringing this chaos into my life, but I couldn't. She was just as much a victim as I was, maybe even more so. She'd lost her father, then got manipulated by a man who promised to help her get justice. I walked to the kitchen and came back with a box of tissues, handed them to her without saying anything. She took them and looked up at me with eyes full of confusion and pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted my father to acknowledge me, even if it was posthumous. I just wanted proof that I mattered to him, that I wasn't just a mistake he could erase." I sat down on the couch next to her, keeping some distance but close enough that she'd know I wasn't her enemy. "Your father was a complicated man," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I won't lie and say he was perfect, because clearly he wasn't. He hurt you and your mother in ways I'm only just understanding. But I didn't know about you, Nalani. I swear on everything I love, I didn't know Jerome had a daughter. If I had known, I would have made sure you were taken care of in the will. I would have made sure you got something, because that's only right." Nalani looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was telling the truth, and I let her look. I had nothing to hide. I'd been kept in the dark just like she had, just in different ways. "Why didn't he tell you?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "Why would he keep me a secret from you? Was he ashamed of me?" I felt tears burning my own eyes because I didn't have an answer that would make her feel better. "I think your father was running from his past," I said finally. "I think he made mistakes when he was young, and instead of facing them and trying to make them right, he just started over. He built a new life and pretended the old one didn't exist. That's not fair to you, and it's not right, but I don't think it was about shame. I think it was about fear. Fear that if I knew about you, I'd see him differently. Fear that if he tried to reconnect with you, he'd have to face what he'd done." Nalani sobbed harder at that, and I found myself reaching out to touch her shoulder. She didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long minute, two women who'd loved the same man in different ways, both betrayed by him and by Keon Johnson. Then, Nalani's. Fiancé, the real Keon, cleared his throat and spoke up from where he was standing by the window. Ladies, I hate to bring this up right now, but we need to talk about the legal situation. Keon Johnson married you under false pretenses, which might be grounds for annulment. And if he was planning to challenge the will, we need to get ahead of that before he tries anything else. I hadn't even thought about the legal mess we were facing, hadn't thought past the emotional devastation. But he was right. Keon Johnson had wormed his way into my life and my finances, and God only knew what kind of damage he could do if we didn't act fast. I need to call my lawyer, I said, standing up and looking for my phone. And I need to call Darius and tell him what happened before he hears it from someone else. Nalani stood up too, wiping her face and trying to compose herself. I have a lawyer too, she said. From when I was first thinking about challenging the will, I never went through with it because it felt wrong. Felt like I was disrespecting my father's choices, even though he'd disrespected me my whole life. But maybe my lawyer can help us figure this out together. She looked at me with hope in her eyes, hope that we could somehow come out of this as allies instead of enemies. I wanted to give her that hope because I knew what it felt like to be abandoned and forgotten. Listen, I said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and right at the same time. Jerome left a good amount of money in 3 barbershops. He left it all to me and Darius because he thought we were his only family. But you're his family too. You're his daughter. And even though he didn't do right by you, I can. I'm not saying I'm going to hand over half the estate or anything crazy like that, but I want to work something out. I want to make sure you get something from your father, something that shows you mattered even if he never said it. Nalani's eyes went wide, and she looked at me like I'd just offered her the world. You'd do that? After everything that just happened, after Keon used me to try to get to your money, you'd still help me? I nodded, and I meant it. You didn't know what Keon Johnson was doing. You thought he was helping you get justice, not running a con. And the truth is, you deserve something from Jerome, not because of some legal challenge, but because it's the right thing to do. Because you're his daughter, and that means something. For the first time since she showed up at my door, Nalani smiled through her tears, and I saw Jerome in that smile. I saw the man I'd loved, the parts of him that were good before the secrets and lies corrupted everything. When I called Darius to tell him what happened, I expected shock and anger and maybe some "I told you so" attitude about marrying Keon so fast. What I didn't expect was the long silence on the other end of the phone, followed by 3 words that made my blood run cold. I knew, Ma. I almost dropped my phone right there in the kitchen where Nalani and her fiancé were sitting at my table drinking coffee while we waited for lawyers to call back. You knew what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper because I was afraid of the answer. Darius sighed, and I could hear the guilt in his breath. I knew Keon wasn't who he said he was. I knew he was asking too many questions about Dad's business and his past. I knew something was off about the way he came into our lives so perfect, so convenient, right when you were most vulnerable. I couldn't breathe. My own son had known my husband was lying to me, had known I was being conned, and he hadn't said anything. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, and my voice broke on every word. Why would you let me marry him, let me build a life with him if you knew something was wrong? Darius was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Because you were happy, Ma. For the first time since Dad died, you were smiling again. You were laughing. You were alive. And I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just being paranoid because I didn't like seeing my mom with someone new. I did some digging, found out he'd been in contact with someone in Brooklyn, but I couldn't prove anything concrete. I couldn't prove he was running a scam. And you seemed so in love, Ma. I didn't want to take that away from you based on just a feeling. I was crying now, sitting at my kitchen table with Jerome's secret daughter across from me, and my son's voice in my ear, realizing everyone in my life had been keeping secrets. You should have told me anyway, I said. You should have given me the chance to make my own decision with all the information. You should have trusted me to handle the truth instead of protecting me like I'm some fragile thing that'll break. Darius made a sound that might have been a sob. I'm sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry. I was trying to do right by you, trying to let you have some happiness, and I messed up. I should have said something. I should have investigated deeper before you married him. I failed you. I wanted to stay angry at him, wanted to rage about betrayal and secrets, but I couldn't. He was my son, and he'd been trying to protect me the only way he knew how. Come home, I said. Come home right now because I need you, and we need to figure out what we're going to do about all this mess. 30 minutes later, Darius walked through my front door and froze when he saw Nalani sitting at the kitchen table. I watched him look at her, saw recognition flicker across his face, and that's when I realized there was more to this story. You know her, I said, and it wasn't a question. Darius nodded slowly, his eyes locked on Nalani. We met about 6 months ago. She came to one of the barbershops looking for information about Dad. She showed me pictures of her and Dad when she was a baby, showed me her birth certificate with his name on it. She told me everything about how he abandoned her and her mother in Brooklyn. He looked at me with pain in his eyes. I wanted to tell you, Ma. I wanted to tell you Dad had another daughter, but I didn't know how. You were already grieving him, already trying to rebuild your life. How was I supposed to tell you the man you loved had a whole secret family he never mentioned? Nalani spoke up then, her voice soft. I made him promise not to tell you. I told him I wasn't ready to meet you yet, that I needed time to figure out what I wanted. I didn't know if I wanted money or just acknowledgement or an apology from someone, anyone who could speak for my father. She looked at Darius with something like affection. Your son was kind to me. He listened to my story and believed me when a lot of people wouldn't have. He offered to help me however he could. But then Keon Johnson showed up saying he had a better plan, a faster way to get what I deserved, and I was stupid enough to believe him. Darius sat down at the table and put his head in his hands. I should have connected the dots sooner. When Keon started dating you, Ma, I should have realized he was the same guy Nalani mentioned was helping her. But she never told me his full name, just called him Keon. And I didn't want to believe someone I'd introduced you to would do something like this. The four of us sat around that kitchen table like refugees from a war, trying to piece together how we'd all been played by the same man. Nalani's fiancé, whose name I finally learned was Keon Baptiste, but who insisted we call him Baptiste to avoid confusion, laid out what he knew. He was a paralegal working on his law degree, which explained why he was so calm about the legal aspects of this nightmare. He told us that what Keon Johnson had done was definitely fraud, possibly bigamy since he'd proposed to Nalani while married to me, and we had grounds for both criminal charges and a civil suit. But he also warned us that going after him legally would be expensive and time-consuming, and we might not get much satisfaction in the end. Men like him are good at hiding assets and disappearing, Baptiste said. The best revenge is to cut him off completely, make sure he gets nothing from anyone, and move on with your lives stronger than he left you. The next morning, I woke up in my empty bed, and for a second, I forgot everything that had happened. I reached out for Keon, my hand expecting to find his warm body next to mine, but all I felt was cold sheets. Then, reality crashed back in, and I remembered that my husband was a con artist, my dead husband had a secret daughter, and my son had been keeping secrets to protect me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had gotten so complicated, when my phone buzzed with a text from Baptiste. Found something. Come to Nalani's hotel. Bring Darius. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on some clothes, and called my son. An hour later, we were sitting in Nalani's hotel suite at the Ritz-Carlton, watching Baptiste pull up files on his laptop like he was some kind of detective in a movie. I did some digging last night, he said, turning the laptop so we could all see the screen. Your husband, or ex-husband, or whatever we're calling him, has done this before. The screen showed news articles from 3 years ago about a man named Kevin Johnston who'd been arrested for marrying a wealthy widow in Atlanta and trying to steal her inheritance. The mugshot looked exactly like my Keon, just with a different name. Baptiste scrolled down to show more articles, more women, more cons. There was a Maria Rodriguez in Houston, a Jennifer Chang in Seattle, a Lisa Thompson in Miami. All wealthy widows, all targeted by the same man using different names, all manipulated into marriage before he could access their finances. My stomach turned as I realized I was just the latest in a long line of women he'd victimized. "Oh my God," I whispered. "This is what he does. This is his whole life, finding vulnerable women and exploiting them." Nalani looked sick too, her hand covering her mouth like she might throw up. "He played me too," she said. "He saw my pain about my father and used it against me. We were both just marks to him, just opportunities." Darius was reading through the articles with fury written all over his face. Some of these women pressed charges. He served 6 months in jail in Atlanta, got out on good behavior, and then disappeared. There's a warrant out for him in Seattle for fraud. He's basically a fugitive who keeps changing his name and moving to new cities. He looked at me with determination in his eyes. "We're going to nail him, Ma. We're going to make sure he pays for what he did to you, to Nalani, to all these women." But I wasn't sure I wanted to go through a legal battle, wasn't sure I wanted to spend months or years in court reliving the humiliation of being conned. I just wanted him gone, wanted to move on and rebuild my life without his shadow hanging over everything. Baptiste seemed to read my mind because he leaned back and said, "There's another option. We gather all this evidence, we threaten to send it to the police and the media, and we force him to sign annulment papers and a document swearing he has no claim to your estate. We make him disappear quietly in exchange for not destroying what's left of his life." That's exactly what we did. Baptiste reached out to Keon Johnson, whose real name was apparently Kevin Marcus Sullivan according to the arrest records, and laid out what we knew. We knew about his prior cons, his arrest record, the outstanding warrant in Seattle. We knew he'd committed bigamy by proposing to Nalani while married to me. We knew everything, and we had the evidence to prove it. Baptiste told him he had 2 choices: sign the papers giving up any claim to me or my estate and leave Charlotte forever, or face criminal charges that would put him in prison for years. Keon called me after. Baptiste delivered the ultimatum, his voice desperate and pleading. "Claudette, please. I know I messed up, but I love you. What we had was real. Please, don't do this." I listened to him beg for maybe 30 seconds before I cut him off. "You're a liar and a con artist. You never loved me. You loved my money and my loneliness. Sign the papers and leave or go to jail. Those are your only options." He signed the papers 2 days later in a lawyer's office downtown, his hand shaking as he gave up any legal claim to being my husband or having any rights to Jerome's estate. I was there when he signed, wanted to look him in the eye one last time. He tried to hold my gaze, tried to say something meaningful, but I turned away. I didn't owe him my attention, didn't owe him closure or forgiveness. When the lawyer said it was done, that the annulment was processed and legal, I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just taken off chains I didn't know I was wearing. Nalani was waiting outside with Baptiste and Darius, and when she saw my face, she smiled. "It's over?" she asked. I nodded. "It's over. He's gone. And now we can figure out what comes next without him poisoning everything." We went to lunch after that, the 4 of us sitting in a booth at a soul food restaurant, eating fried chicken and collard greens while we talked about the future. Nalani told us about her life in Brooklyn, about her mother who was still working as a hairstylist in a small shop, about her own dreams of opening a beauty supply store chain. She was smart and driven, and I could see Jerome in her ambition. Darius told her about the barbershops, about how he'd been managing them since Jerome died, about his plans to expand into a 4th location. They talked business like old friends, like brother and sister discovering each other for the first time. Baptiste talked about finishing his law degree, about wanting to start a firm that helped people who'd been victims of fraud, and I sat there listening to them, feeling something shift inside me. I'd lost a husband, but I'd gained a daughter. I'd been betrayed, but I'd also been freed from a lie. And somehow, sitting in that booth with these 3 people who'd all been hurt by the same man, I felt like maybe we could build something real out of the wreckage he'd left behind. 3 weeks after Keon Johnson, or Kevin Sullivan, or whatever his real name was, left Charlotte with nothing but the clothes on his back and a signed agreement never to contact any of us again, I sat in my lawyer's office with Nalani and Darius to discuss Jerome's will. My lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, a sharp black woman in her 60s who didn't take nonsense from anyone, spread the documents across her big oak desk and looked at all 3 of us over her reading glasses. What we're talking about here is a voluntary redistribution of assets, she said carefully. Claudette, you have every legal right to keep everything Jerome left you and Darius. Nalani has no legal claim because Jerome never acknowledged her in any legal documents. But you want to change that. You want to give her a portion of the estate. Is that correct? I nodded, ignoring the way my hands were shaking in my lap. This felt huge, felt final, felt like I was doing something that would change all our lives forever. I want to split the estate more fairly, I said. Jerome wronged Nalani when he abandoned her. I can't fix what he did, but I can try to make it right now. I want to set up a trust for her that includes 20% of the liquid assets and one of the barbershops. Darius keeps 2 barbershops and 40% of the liquid assets. I keep the house and 40% of the liquid assets. That way, everyone gets something, and Nalani gets acknowledged as Jerome's daughter the way she should have been all along. Mrs. Hendricks wrote down everything I said, her pen moving fast across her legal pad. Then she looked at Darius. You understand this means you're giving up a significant amount of money and 1 business location? Your mother can make this decision on her own, but the original will left half to her and half to you. If she's taking from her portion and yours, you need to consent. Darius didn't even hesitate. I consent. Nalani is my sister. Dad should have taken care of her, and since he didn't, we will. Nalani started crying when Darius said that, started crying so hard Baptiste had to hand her tissues from the box on Mrs. Hendricks's desk. I don't deserve this, she whispered. I came here angry and hurt and wanting to take what I thought was mine by force. But you're giving it to me freely, giving me more than I ever expected, and I don't know how to thank you. I reached across the desk and took her hand, squeezing it tight. You're family. Family takes care of each other. That's all this is. And maybe if you're open to it, we can actually build a relationship. We can get to know each other as people instead of just as victims of the same men's lies. Because I think Jerome would have wanted that, even if he was too scared or too proud to make it happen himself. Nalani squeezed my hand back and nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Mrs. Hendricks smiled at us, the first real smile I'd seen from her in all the years she'd been my lawyer, and started drafting the new documents. The process took a few weeks to finalize, with lawyers reviewing everything and making sure it was all legal and binding. During that time, Nalani stayed in Charlotte, and we spent almost every day together. I took her to the barbershops and introduced her to the staff, telling everyone she was Jerome's daughter and part of the family business now. Some of the old-timers who'd known Jerome in his early days in Charlotte looked at her with shock, but they welcomed her once they saw how much she looked like him, how she had his smile and his way of talking about business like it was art. Darius taught her the books, showed her how to manage inventory and scheduling, explained the relationships Jerome had built with product suppliers and local businesses. She soaked it all in like a sponge, asked smart questions, and made suggestions that showed she understood retail and customer service in ways that would help the business grow. But the most important day was when I took Nalani to meet her grandmother, Jerome's mother, Mrs. Florence Morrison, who was 92 years old and living in a nursing home on the south side of Charlotte. Jerome had told me his mother was dead, told me he had no family, but that had been another lie. I'd discovered the truth when going through Jerome's old papers, looking for documents Mrs. Hendricks needed for the estate redistribution. There was a letter from the nursing home, dated just 2 months before Jerome died, asking about overdue bills for his mother's care. I'd called the home immediately, paid the back bills, and discovered Jerome had been paying for his mother's care but never visiting her, sending money but not love. When I told Nalani about her grandmother, she looked at me with wonder and pain all mixed together. I have a grandmother? My father's mother is alive and she's here in Charlotte? I nodded. And she doesn't know about you. But I think it's time she did. I think it's time we stopped keeping secrets and started being honest about who we are and where we come from. Mrs. Florence Morrison was sitting in her room watching The Price is Right when we walked in, her white hair perfectly curled, her dark skin smooth despite her age. She looked at me with confusion at first, then recognition. Claudette, is that you, baby? Where's my son? Why hasn't Jerome come to see me? My heart broke because she asked that question every time I visited, her dementia making her forget that Jerome was gone. but today I had an answer that would maybe give her something good to hold on to. Mrs. Florence, I brought someone to meet you. This is Nalani. She's Jerome's daughter. The old woman's eyes got wide and she looked at Nalani like she was seeing a ghost. Jerome's daughter? My grandbaby? Oh Lord, come here, child, let me look at you. Nalani walked over slowly and knelt down by her grandmother's chair, tears already streaming down her face. Mrs. Florence touched Nalani's face with trembling hands, traced her features like she was memorizing them. You look just like him, just like my Jerome when he was young. Where have you been, baby? Why hasn't my son brought you to see me? Nalani looked at me for help and I knelt down beside her, taking Mrs. Florence's other hand. Jerome made some mistakes, Mrs. Florence. He kept Nalani away for too long, but she's here now, and she's going to visit you all the time, going to make sure you know her and love her the way you should have been able to all along. The three of us sat there in that nursing home room, 3 generations of women connected by one complicated man, crying, and holding each other while Drew Carey gave away a car on TV. 6 months after the day that turned my life upside down, I was standing in my backyard watching Darius and Nalani set up tables for a family barbecue. It was the first time we were having a real celebration since everything went down, and I'd invited everyone. Nalani's mother Shanice, who'd flown in from Brooklyn, Baptiste, who'd become like another son to me, Mrs. Florence, who we'd brought from the nursing home for the afternoon in her wheelchair, and a few close friends who'd supported us through the chaos. The weather was perfect, that kind of late spring afternoon where the temperature is just right and the sky is so blue it hurts to look at. I was wearing a new dress I'd bought for myself, nothing expensive, but something that made me feel good, made me feel like myself again. I'd taken off my wedding ring weeks ago, put it in a box in the back of my closet where I kept things I wasn't ready to throw away but didn't want to look at either. Shanice walked up beside me and handed me a glass of sweet tea, her smile warm and genuine. She was 50 years old but looked younger, with smooth brown skin and eyes that held both hardness and kindness. We'd talked on the phone several times over the past months, working through the complicated emotions of being connected by a man who'd hurt us both. She told me she didn't blame me for what Jerome did, said she'd forgiven him years ago, even if she never forgot. Your backyard is beautiful, she said, looking around at the flowers I'd planted and the new patio furniture I'd bought. Jerome always did have good taste in houses. I laughed, surprising myself with how easy it felt. He had good taste in a lot of things. He was just terrible at being honest about them. Shanice laughed too, and it felt good to be able to joke about it, to take some of the power away from the pain by making it smaller, more manageable. Nalani came over and hugged both of us, her face glowing with happiness that still seemed new to her, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. The food is almost ready. Darius is about to burn those ribs if somebody doesn't stop him. We all walked over to where Darius was standing at the grill, wearing Jerome's old Kiss the Cook apron and arguing with Baptiste about the proper way to season chicken. Mrs. Florence was parked nearby in her wheelchair, clapping her hands and laughing at something Darius said. It was so normal, so family-like, that I felt tears burning my eyes for the 100th time that day. But these were good tears, healing tears, the kind that come when you realize you've survived something that should have destroyed you. We'd taken the wreckage of lies and secrets and pain, and we'd built something real from it. We'd built a family that chose each other instead of being bound by blood alone. As we sat down to eat, passing plates of ribs and collard greens and cornbread, I looked around the table at these people who'd become my world. Darius, my son who'd grown into a man I was proud of, who'd learned that protecting someone sometimes meant telling them hard truths instead of shielding them from pain. Nalani, my stepdaughter or sister or friend or all of those things at once, who'd come looking for justice and found family instead. Baptiste, who'd stood by Nalani through her heartbreak and who was planning to propose to her again, this time with no lies between them. Shanice, who'd survived being abandoned with grace and had raised an incredible daughter despite everything. Mrs. Florence, who got to know her granddaughter in whatever time she had left. And me, Claudette Morrison Johnson, who the hell knows anymore. A woman who'd been conned and lied to but who'd come out stronger on the other side. I want to say something, I announced, standing up with my glass of tea raised. Everyone got quiet and looked at me. This year's been the hardest of my life. I lost a husband I thought I knew, found out he'd been keeping secrets, and got conned by another man who saw my loneliness as an opportunity. I felt stupid and used and broken. But then, something amazing happened. I found family I didn't know I had. I found strength I didn't know I possessed, and I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best things if we're brave enough to keep going. I looked at Nalani and felt my voice catch. Jerome wasn't perfect. He hurt people, made terrible choices, ran from his mistakes instead of facing them. But he gave us something precious without meaning to. He gave us each other, and I think that's a kind of redemption, even if he's not here to see it. Nalani was crying again, but she was smiling too. Thank you, Claudette. Thank you for seeing me, for believing me, for giving me more than I deserved. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have hated me for showing up at your door, but instead, you gave me a family. The barbecue lasted until the sun went down and the lightning bugs came out, floating around the yard like little pieces of magic. We told stories about Jerome, the good and the bad, and Shanice shared memories of young Jerome that made us laugh and cry at the same time. Darius and Baptiste talked business with Nalani about expansion plans for the barbershops, and I sat with Mrs. Florence and told her about her granddaughter over and over because her memory wouldn't hold on to it, but her heart would. When everyone finally left and I was alone in my house, I didn't feel lonely. I felt full, felt like my life was bigger and richer than it had been even when Jerome was alive, even when I thought Keon Johnson loved me. I'd learned that family isn't just who you're born to or who you marry. Family is who shows up when your world falls apart and helps you rebuild it brick by brick. Family is who sits with you in the wreckage and says, we're going to get through this together. Family is who you choose to love even, when loving them is complicated and messy and hard. And I'd chosen Nalani, chosen to see past the anger and pain to the hurt little girl who just wanted her daddy to love her. She'd chosen me too, chosen to forgive a woman who'd lived the life she should have had, chosen to build something new instead of staying stuck in bitterness. That night, as I got ready for bed in my big empty house that didn't feel empty anymore, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone different than who'd been there 6 months ago. I saw a survivor. I saw a woman who'd been knocked down twice by men who didn't deserve her, but who'd gotten back up both times. I saw someone who was learning that real love isn't about romance or passion or fairy tale endings. Real love is about showing up, about choosing kindness over anger, about building something that lasts even when it's hard. And as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I smiled into the darkness because I knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone. I had family now. Real family, and that was worth more than any con artist's lies or dead man's secrets. That was worth everything.